This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, Show 14. Why do people like long walks on the beach?
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Machaba. Ramsey does not enjoy long walks on the beach. He dislikes the feeling of sand on his feet.
Hey, SE Nation. Welcome back to another show. Thank you for being here. Again, I really appreciate your time. I enjoy spending this time talking to the engineers and knowing that people are actually listening to this. So thank you for choosing to spend your time with me. Before we get into the show, I do have a couple of housekeeping items as usual. I want to open this up to whoever wants to be interviewed on the show. Obviously, you'd have to be an SE or a salesperson or someone who can actually provide their experience back to the other folks. You don't have to be an SE or a professional or in sales for a long time, because anyone can help anybody. Even if you've been there for 3 months, you can pretty much talk about the struggles that you've been going through. And just sharing those could actually help a lot of people, because everybody thinks that they're special and nobody else is going through what they're going through. But we know for a fact that almost everybody is going through the same thing. I did that. I thought I was the only SE who's going through whatever I was going through. Talked to my manager, was like, oh yeah, no, that guy's going through that. That guy's going through that. So just knowing about other people going through the same thing as you could be helpful, in the sense that you're not alone and people get out of it. So if you are interested in being interviewed and you're listening to the show, I think the best way would be for you to go in and sign up on my website to the newsletter. I always reach out to the folks who signed up to see what topics they want to be covered, and I'll also check if you want to be interviewed on the podcast after I check out your LinkedIn. So that'll be good. The more people who can share their experience, the better. Anyways, I'm rambling right now. So moving on. The interview today is with Mike Emmert. Mike is a seasoned account executive and director. I worked with him in Spirent. I didn't work with him as his SE or anything, but whenever I sat with him and talked to him, it's just, he has a wealth of wisdom. He's been doing it for a while, and he knows what it takes to be a great account manager, because he is one. And I thought it would be good to have an account manager share his opinion of what a good SE is, because we don't always agree with account managers. And Mike has a lot of information, so I'd love to hear if you guys agree. I post this on LinkedIn. Every time I publish a podcast episode, I post the episode on LinkedIn. So if you see it and you want to have the discussion, if you disagree with anything that Mike said, by all means, put it on. Let's start a conversation, because that's how we get better. The show notes will be on wethesalesengineers.com/show14. So, and enough with me talking. Let's get to the interview. Hey, Mike, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
It is definitely my pleasure. I really wanted to have you on because when we worked together, every time I sat on the same table with you, I was smarter for the 10 minutes after I left, and then it just went back down to the basics. So I'm glad you're here.
Nice.
I wanted to maybe start off. Maybe you can let us know who you are and what you do.
Sure. My name is Mike Emmert, and right now I'm a network services sales executive for IBM. I've done this position for about 6 years at IBM. Obviously, I spent 4 years at Spirent, both as a regional sales manager and as a director of sales. My background is computer science as a major. I was a software developer for a number of years, and then I was a network engineer for a number of years. and also a sales engineer on the networking side of the business before I jumped into direct selling.
So you've been doing this for a while. Yeah.
I have. I've been in technology-related sales, I guess, since 1987. So more years than I'd care to admit, I think.
It's all good. It's almost as old as I am, but I'm not comparing those two.
I figured you'd point it out.
Yeah. All right. Well, so you did both. You did pretty much all engineering jobs, all the way to sales engineer, and now you've been a sales in the direct sales for a while. What would you say the main difference between direct sales and a sales engineer is?
I would say the primary difference would be I guess I'd relate them to more do's and don'ts for what I would consider a sales engineer or a systems engineer versus a direct seller. The big difference, obviously, number one, is how you're compensated, and it depends on where you work, right? I mean, most SEs when I started were on an 80-20 plan, and then when I was at AT&T, they flipped this to a 60-40 plan. And it was at that point I said, well, geez, if I'm going to be that highly leveraged, then I might as well be a direct seller. Now, as far as the customer engagement is concerned, obviously the sales guys talk more about price. SEs shouldn't. Sales people or sales persons, I should say, are not going to be as technically deep, of course. So hopefully staying more at 10,000 feet, really focusing on value propositions, really trying to progress sales through all the different sales stages. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't believe SEs should be doing the same thing. I definitely do. And I think that's a real big differentiator for those that I would say are really strong SEs versus those who are just very technical SEs.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, and where I'm going is I'll start off with the term SE. I mean, over the years, I've heard SEs like to call themselves systems engineers. I always have referred to them as sales engineers, and I think there's a distinct difference in the way they think. So a systems engineer, will really focus on, hey, my only job here is to represent the technical side of the solution that we're trying to talk about, right? And as a systems engineer, you could say that there's not a lot of selling associated with that. Now, I think it's great to call yourself a systems engineer to the customer technical contact that you're working with, because that's a little less threatening than salespeople. I mean, still to this day, a lot of customers, have a bad taste in their mouth when they're talking to a direct seller. However, they seem to have a little more trust with an SE. But the difference is a sales engineer, when they have built credibility and trust with whoever the technical customer contact they're working with, they can do all sorts of selling, right? I mean, they're in for example, they're in a lab environment and they're working on a demo or a proof of concept or whatever it might be. A perfect position once they've gained the trust of the customer to ask questions that may not have been discovered to that point. And where I'm going with that is budget, for one. I mean, I always ask that question, is this budgeted and how much have you budgeted? And there are customers who are very reluctant to share, even though they know what that information is. The SE is in a perfect position to ask questions like that, and it'll come across as much less threatening than it would from a direct seller. I mean, I could go on and on about that. There are other things that they should. The bottom line is the SE can become a trusted advisor to the customer technical influencers and help progress the sale. I mean, they can also discover things like who is the competition and how strong is their position on that particular opportunity.
So going back to the budget question, generally speaking, I used to ask that question. Do you have to build trust in order to ask that question? I used to ask it just to see if I can provide them a solution that fits around their budget more than anything. So,
I think so. I think the only time you have to build trust is if there seems to be reluctance to share, but you do believe that they know the answer, right? And especially when you're working with a customer who has a very strict budgeting process. So in a lot of cases, they wouldn't even be speaking to you unless they've budgeted something for that activity or that solution. But there's a lot of customers still believe, oh, if they share their budget with me, like they say, oh, I have $500,000 to spend, then the solution is going to magically come in at $500,000. Whereas if you have built trust and credibility with that customer, and usually those are longer term customers, they're going to know that you're working in the best interest of them, right? And that you're not going to just solution everything you can to get every last dollar that you can out of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Do you believe that all salespeople are working in the best interest of the customer? Is it possible that they are trying to drag the last penny out?
Yeah, definitely not, right? I mean, and that's one of the reasons that the term sales has left a bad taste in a lot of customers' mouths, right? Is because they have worked with people who are just trying to dig every last dollar out of them, and they over-engineer solutions just in order to accomplish that. So it's something you're always working up against, right? Whether it's the direct seller or the SE.
Sounds good. Yeah, that makes sense. I wanted to step back. You mentioned that you were in network design and then you went to become an SE. I hear a lot of complaints from people that in order to become an SE, you have to have experience as an SE. So how were you able to get over that and just become an SE from that position?
That's a good question. I mean, that was a long time ago. I think how that happened was, I had a really good manager at the time. And I think the manager recognized in me that I was able to communicate to people at the level that was most appropriate. So I understood who my audience was. And probably the biggest key attribute that I think they recognized was that I was a good listener. And being a good listener, I was pretty good at doing discovery. And, I wasn't too quick to solution something, which is a mistake I see all the time.
So you went from network design to SE within the same company?
Yes, I did. Yep. Yeah, and I mean, as network design, I think I was a network architect, and I think the activities that afforded me that opportunity were, I had to present my network architecture and design to a lot of different people, right? And in a lot of cases, I actually had to try to justify spending dollars to make that new architecture happen. So that, in effect, was selling.
I went through the same path, actually. I didn't do any software design, but I went from support to network design engineer to sales engineer, but in different companies. So I'm glad that somebody else went through the same career path.
Yep.
You've worked with a lot of SEs since you've become a salesperson. What do you think differentiates the good SE from the bad SE, other than one is strictly technical?
Yep. So I think a few things. One I mentioned earlier, and that is they are really good listeners. And I'll give an example. If you're in a discovery session with a customer, you're probing and prodding, right? Trying to understand what their pain points are and where they might need help. What makes the really good ones is that they don't immediately jump into solutioning. I mean, they may hear the customer state a very specific problem, and then the SE, I'll say the poor SE versus the good SE. The poor SE will immediately start talking about, well, we have an appliance that can do this. We have a software solution that can do that. I mean, a discovery meeting is not the place to solution. The good ones are more like a doctor, right? Very prescriptive, and they say, "Oh, your knee hurts. Tell me more about the knee pain, and when do you experience that pain, and why do you think you experience that pain, and what does it mean to you, right? If you're not going to eliminate the pain." The other thing that really differentiates a good SE is when you're down the road and let's say you're doing a product demo, and you talk to the customer about what they would like to see in the demo, and they might give you 3 specific use cases. And as you start through your demo and you're focusing on those 3 specific use cases, you recognize whether it's in a facial expression or a comment that they make, that they want to speak to something else, or they want to see something else, or something else is important outside of those original use cases that you had planned for. The good SEs are able to adapt and adjust on the fly. It's not where they've prepared a script for this particular demo, and it doesn't matter what the customer says or does, they are not going to deviate from that script. The good ones are really good at extemporaneous demo, if you will.
That would imply they have a good grasp of their technology. So I guess that's one other attribute of a good SE.
Yes. Yeah, and that's table stakes to me.
Yeah.
Right? Every SE needs to be technically strong, and I think that's the assumption when you go in. And, when the customer sees the title SE, they're going to have the same expectation.
All right, so when you talk to generalist SEs, here's where I find it interesting. The management for generalist SEs don't really want them to get in depth in a specific product. They want them to be generalist in all products. So if someone's doing that and he's a generalist, how would you recommend getting technical in a specific product, even though he's not required to or he's not wanted to? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think there's a couple of pieces to that. The good SEs or the great SEs, I guess, somebody can tell them, hey, I want you to be a generalist in all of these areas, right? And I don't want you to be too specific. But I think the nature of an SE is they're curious people anyway, right? And technically curious. So my opinion of that is, and the way I always operated is, if I had a very specific interest or an area that I thought was going to be really hot for my customer base, I just did that on my own, right? I got deeper. And I wasn't trying to be the subject matter expert necessarily in everything, but I think you can easily develop more in-depth knowledge on 1 or 2 topics, right? That you deem are important for your customer segment.
Yeah, it's like the 80-20 rule, where 20% of your products sell 80% of your revenue within a specific territory. So I guess you can look at what that 20% is and get really technical on that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I have some specific examples about Spirent and some of the folks. If you care to go into those, I'm not sure they'd be meaningful to everybody, but
I think we can pass. This is not specific to Spirent at all. So most of my listeners are from outside of Spirent. But
sure.
if you have examples you can share that's general, then I'm sure everybody would be happy to hear.
Well, I have worked with generalist SEs, right? And one of the better ones I've ever worked with was a great generalist, But at that time, automation was a really hot topic. And the way we were organized, we actually had a separate subject matter expert on automation. And it became really apparent to him that he was not able to have in-depth conversations or lead conversations where he wanted when the customer brought up automation. So he took it upon himself, working with a subject matter expert, to become much more knowledgeable on the topic, right? And we were able to progress sales much more quickly where automation was concerned because we didn't have to deal with scheduling and another meeting and another individual until it was time.
So basically, if I can maybe estimate what you're saying, use the resources you have to learn about the technology that you need to learn. You don't have to be on your own and just reading stuff. You can actually use the resources.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, hopefully you're going to pick some of that up as you work with those other subject matter experts on other opportunities, right? When you watch them do a product demo.
Yeah. I think every company, like we call them overlay sales or overlay SEs. Other companies call them consultant SEs. So most companies have those.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
IBM does too.
Okay. So we discussed what makes a good SE and how a technical person can get into being an SE. Some of the discussions I have with colleagues is about the relationships that they have with their account managers, and not all of them are good relationships. How do you think people can form a good relationship between SEs and salespeople?
I think maybe the biggest factor is the ability to appear to stay in your lane, right? Salespeople, a lot of salespeople are control freaks by nature, right? And if the SE is willing and able to stay in their lane, even though somebody's not trying to box them in, I think that goes a long way to building trust between the salesperson and the SE. And I'll give you a really good example. I don't think SEs should ever talk about price, right? And if they start talking about price, then the salesperson can look at that like, hey, you're stepping on my toes or you're making my job more difficult, because you should not be talking about price. You should be deferring those conversations to me. And there are other ways, right, without even being specific about price. I've heard SEs actually say things like, well, that solution is not too expensive. Or I've even heard people say that solution is pretty pricey. You know, those types of comments and words actually deviate from selling value, and they also erode the trust between the salesperson and the SE, because now they're worried that they're going to say something that they really shouldn't say that's really not in their lane.
A note on that, specifically when they say a product or a solution is pricey or not pricey, that's from the SE's perspective. It's not even from the customer's perspective. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So that's a very good. On the other hand, we do see a lot of salespeople trying to step over our lane and give technical information to customers which are completely incorrect, and then we have to go around fixing those. So I guess it's a two-way street.
Oh, no question about it. And I absolutely know those technical direct sellers who don't know how to stay in their lane. And I think it goes with a lot of frank conversation, right? And I always had a policy with my SEs, no matter who they were, and we established this up front, that we would have sessions after every customer meeting where we would share feedback to one another, right? Hey, I liked how you did this. I don't think you should have said that. And it was a two-way street. The SE got to say their thing as well. So.
Okay, that's good. I don't think everybody has that, which is why I wanted you on the show.
Yeah, and I would insist on that if I were an SE, right? I mean, I think it's important for both sides. I mean, to me, it's all, I coached baseball for years, right? And feedback is the only way you improve, and honest feedback. But when you provide feedback, you can't just say on either side, hey, here's the problem, right? You really, if you can't answer the question, what should I have done differently, then it's not worth sharing.
Right. Yeah. So don't come up with a problem without a solution kind of situation.
Well, yeah, and I don't know that it has to necessarily be a solution, but it certainly has to be an alternative way of behaving, right?
Yeah. Or a suggestion of an alternative way. Yeah. No,
Exactly.
I see what you're saying. We can't force other people to do things that the way we want. That's the thing about people relationships, right? We have to
Absolutely
negotiate with them to find a way to get what we want out of them in the end.
Yep. Well said.
Thank you. I've reached my quota of well-saidedness this session. So, can we talk about the sales cycle and what you think the SE's role versus the sales guy's role in each of the stages? Is that a topic you'd like to cover? All right. We have our own, sales cycle, I guess, terminology. I don't know if you have your own as well.
Yes, everybody does, and it's all different.
Yeah, I've already shared mine. Would you mind sharing like yours? It doesn't have to be specific to IBM, just generally speaking.
Well, they're all generally the same. It's just the terms they use for each of the individual sales cycles, right?
Okay.
So, I mean, the key phase is the qualifying phase, right? Do they have budget? Do they have a compelling reason to act? Et cetera. Then obviously, and that's included with that, and then depending on the sales stages and where you work, discovery is a part of the qualification stage, right? And following that, you can go in a whole lot of different directions. It depends on how much I've had sales meetings where you jump from discovery and following discovery, a proof of concept is the next step. And a lot of that has to do with their compelling reason to act and their timing, right? I mean, you might have a customer who tells you up front, I'm not going to do anything for 6 months. And I'm not going to do anything for 6 months because I'm not going to have budget until 2 quarters out. But I need to do planning now. So.
All right. So would you continue if they want to POC today for something they would buy 6 months or a year, would you continue to do the POC or would you schedule it in like 4 months?
So I would, if they want a POC, I would do it immediately. But then you have to be very disciplined about consistent follow-up and touch points. And my belief is that has to be face-to-face. Because you can be sure that if they're looking that far out, then they're not just looking at you, and hopefully they've shared that with you, or you've asked those questions of who the competition is, and what do you like about them, and what have you heard or don't like about them. And it's especially, and obviously it's especially important if you're trying to displace an incumbent. So getting back to your original question though, Ramsey, I think I see the SE as key in every piece of the sales stage except for the closing, right? The SE does not need to be involved in the closing. Now that's a pure sales activity, direct selling activity. Obviously, I think the direct seller will be having conversations with their SE on the side, but those aren't going to be in concert with the customer, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Generally, you don't want to talk about money with other people in the room. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So you believe an SE has a role in qualification as well? Like discovery, yes. Qualification?
Look, I think in qualification it never hurts, and I like teams, right? It never hurts to have another person's opinion. And if I have an SE that I trust, right, and they're involved in the qualification process, qualification/discovery, I mean, those go hand in hand, then I will always ask, right? I will say, hey, I heard this in this meeting. It sounds like this is fully qualified. Did you hear anything differently? And I think it's especially important for those SEs who eventually have in their development plan that they want to be a direct seller. It's all a great learning process, and it doesn't impact anything negatively, right?
Well, I don't think it impacts anything negatively. It's just if that happens quite often, and well, I guess then you have to prioritize between if there's other tasks that need to happen for other proof of concepts or stuff like that.
Yep, true.
So you mentioned that you can't prescribe during the discovery, like solutioning is the word that you said.
Yep.
From my meetings with my customers, almost everybody wants a taste of our solution before we leave the discovery. And that could be because our products are smaller sales than, let's say, like Nokia or Cisco, where it's a $50 million deal. But how would you deal? Would you provide us a semi-solution on the spot, or would you just push it to later?
I would not. In almost all cases, I would not. And no matter how much they wanted to talk about a specific solution, I generally try to steer away from it in the beginning. And there's a good reason for it in the beginning, right? The only way I will talk about a solution is if they have given me very specific answers up to that point. And I mean very specific answers. They say, look, I have budget. I have to get something done this quarter, or else I lose the budget. I have a compelling reason to act, meaning something bad is going to happen if I don't make this happen, and it's something that's personal generally, right? Their credibility is going to be eroded with their boss is going to evaluate them that they couldn't make something like this happen, whatever the case might be. Unless they have given me every piece of information that I need to show that this is well down the path, then I'm going to steer away from solutioning, because I personally don't believe, unless it's very prescriptive and tactical. I mean, I think that you want to walk away from that meeting and you want to have conversations with your SE on what the solution should look like, right? And what's best for them. I think rushing to that sort of a judgment can lead you down a path where you may not be solutioning what's most appropriate.
That makes sense. You make it sound easy. So, like at the start of the session, you'd say, we're not going to talk any solutions today. We're just here for a discovery meeting, or how would you set it up?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can and look, you want to have broad conversations, right? And you can share, obviously, that you have certain capabilities in your portfolio, right? We can do certain types of traffic generation. We can do automation. We can do service management. We can monitor networks. Those are very broad words, right? That don't talk about specific solutions, but it gives your customer an idea of the capabilities. And I mean, initially, look, the customer wants to talk to you for a reason. They already have something in their head, right? They probably think they already have a solution, but they don't know what yours is, and they don't know what your portfolio of offerings looks like. So, the salesperson needs to do their job in the beginning. If the customer doesn't know them, then they should be presenting a broad overview of what their solution portfolio looks like. So then you can point to those, right? As you start into your conversation, you can say, yeah, that what you're talking about right now falls into our automation platform. And I can talk a lot more about that later, but let's dig a little more.
Right. Okay. Yep. That makes sense. I find like most customers are willing to listen to what you have to say. They're willing to show a little bit of trust. So if you recommend that, hey, like I can't provide you a solution today based on what we talked. Like this is something we'd have to discuss and come up with a good solution for you. They tend to listen, but some don't.
Yep. Well, and look, in the end, I think you've had a successful meeting if you're talking about an initial sales cycle, the early stages, right? Is the same adage that you get when you're doing a job interview. And that's if you were being interviewed for a job and you're able to get the interviewer to speak 70% of the time, then you've probably had a really good interview. People like to talk about themselves. People like to talk about what they're proud about. You know, if you've had to do all the talking, then it's sometimes not the best outcome.
That makes. I never thought about the interview like that, and I've never had an interview where my interviewer talked more than I did. So, I'm not sure how I got this job, but hey, I'm here. So.
Well, I'm not saying it happens all the time, right? But generally, if you get people talking about the things that are interesting to them, then they walk away saying, wow, that was a really good interview. That person was really interested in me. Obviously, you're interested in the position or you wouldn't even be talking to them.
Yeah. No, that's a good idea. Like, yeah. All right, moving on. I'm going to go on a tangent right now. So, generally speaking, how much do you think the SE should be meeting with customers?
That's kind of a hard question. I mean, I think it's highly variable. But, you know, and let me put it this way. If they don't have any solution in place today from the competition, you know, I would answer that a little bit different than if they had an incumbent in there or if they had other competition that were calling on them concurrently. I think more is better, generally speaking. So, I mean, I would love to see SEs, once they establish a relationship with the technical contact on the customer side, I think they should be doing things like taking them to lunch, right? They should be doing activities with them if they can. Everything that the sales guy does or the salesperson does, I think it's fair game for the SE to be doing that with their technical contacts. I mean, it's all about building relationships, right? I mean, in a lot of the cases, and if you're doing technical selling, the customer technical contacts, they're big time influencers. They may not have budget, but you're going to find out very, very quickly if they're, I'll call them the power sponsor, who everybody listens to. And if everybody listens to them and you have a great relationship with them, then your odds of success skyrocket.
Okay. So visit them as much as you can, but keep doing the work that you still have to do in the office.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of people in general, and salespeople do it too, they just don't do enough to build relationships. I mean, I've always believed, and I still believe to this day, that people buy from people they like.
Yep. It's definitely harder to buy from someone you don't like.
Well, it is. And, you know, getting trapped into that selling features and functions is a losing proposition.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm going to transition to a round that I call the not so fire round, where I ask you the same 4 questions I've asked a lot of people, and you can take your time answering them because it's a not so fire round. So, other than a notebook and a pen, is there another essential tool a sales engineer should be using?
It depends on the sales stage. Are we talking about early in the sales cycle or pretty far down the path?
Let's talk about both.
Okay. It never hurts to bring a laptop. but I think a notebook and a pen is sufficient, even early in the sales cycle. I would say it would be rare that I would expect the SE to have his or her laptop and be able to whip it open, in one of our initial meetings and start showing them a demo. However, if the customer is interested in being very specific and you're a little bit further down the sales stage and they seem to have confusion on their face when you're talking about a particular solution, and this is when you're in the solutioning stage, right? Then obviously it's critically important that the SE is prepared to open up their laptop and show a little deeper dive representation of whatever it is you're talking about.
Okay.
I think less is more. I'm not a PowerPoint person for the salesperson or the SE unless it's absolutely critical.
Yeah, I hate PowerPoints. For the first year, I just did spray and pray, which kind of sucked.
Yeah.
Is there a book or resource every SE should read?
I think every SE should read and understand whatever sales methodology is employed by the organization they're working for. So whether it's, I really like spin selling, I like solution selling. There are a lot of different resources, and I know you've heard me talk about this before, but understanding the sales cycle and how customers act and interact, I think are things that a lot of SEs are insulated from because they're typically focused on the technical issues, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or ammo.
Sorry?
It's just, the more knowledgeable you are about your company's sales methodology, the better armed and prepared you are, specifically when it comes to overcoming objections. So.
All right. So is it the SE's role to overcome objections or the salesperson's role to overcome objections? Or both?
It's both. It's both. I mean, it just depends on the situation, right? I mean, and you're going to overcome objections when you're having your own individual meetings with whoever that technical customer contact is, right? And you have to be skilled and prepared to do that.
Yep. I feel like if I have the discovery done right, then I rarely get an objection because I know where they want to go and how to talk about the product in a way that they'd understand. And
yep.
The second
I think that's true.
Yeah. The second I get an objection, I'm like, oh, I missed something in the discovery.
Yeah. The one exception to that is, and I mean, I know you've seen this happen too, is where you feel like you understand, it's fully qualified, you've done a great job at discovery, you've solutioned what you think needs to be solutioned that shows value to them, and you're well down the path and you don't think there's competition in there, but at the 11th hour, all of a sudden you find out there is.
Yep.
And you'll start seeing signs of that from the customer, from whoever their engineer is, right? They'll start going down paths that they hadn't gone down before, and that's when you really need to be prepared.
Yeah, that's when the competitor is coaching on what questions they should be asking us.
Yep, they're throwing around FUD, right?
Yep. So, all right. Do you have any tips or tricks for time management and task organization?
Well, I mean, everybody I think has to develop their own, but I think, fail to plan to fail, right? The old adage is very true. I mean, I think it's always helpful. I've told all of the SEs that I've ever worked with that our hours are our customers' hours, right? And if their hours are 8 to 5, and I'm talking about the direct sellers, customer contact as well as the SE or as well as the engineer on the customer side, then those are the hours that we need to be working, right? I know there's a lot of people who believe in flex time, and I do too, right? But we should be at the beck and call of our customers during the hours that they're working. So what that means in my case is, I need to have all of my internal administrivia done before or after my customer hours, if at all possible. I know that that's not always the case. But blocking out time in your calendar for making follow-up calls, for trying to set appointments, whether it's a lunch or a technical conversation, I don't know that those are tips or tricks as much as it is just having discipline with your schedule and blocking it out on your calendar.
Well, I think that's the biggest tip, that people don't block stuff on their calendar, and then their calendar doesn't become somebody else's calendar because, hey, you're free here, let me schedule a meeting for you there.
Yep. Yeah, and if you block out a couple hours at a certain point of the day or 1 or 2 days during the week and you say this is going to be your customer follow-up time, whatever that looks like, then you're right. Nobody else can infringe on your time.
So how would you feel about a sales engineer blocking out time to study new technologies?
That's a tough one. I think if you're doing it to study new technologies at the expense of being able to attend or follow up with an active customer, then clearly the latter takes priority or precedence, in my opinion.
All right, so I'm going to play SE's advocate.
Yep.
So generally speaking, we as SEs need to learn the new technologies in order for the next meeting we get with the customer to be able to answer the questions and be the best SE who can deviate from the planned script, right? And if we don't have time to do that, how are we going to become that SE that will get you that can perform a technical close for you?
Yeah, so I guess we were talking two different things there. I wasn't referring to that situation. Obviously, that's critical for you to be prepared for the next meeting, right? The way I had understood the initial question was that you're studying new technology, right? Or you're trying to get deeper in an area that you might be a generalist in. Those are activities that have to be fit in when you can fit them in. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Clearly, I agree with you. If you have a customer demo that's at the end of the week and you feel like you've not prepared, then you need to block out time to do that. And I think every reasonable salesperson's going to understand that, and they're going to want that.
Hope so. I talked to a lot of SEs who seem to complain about that specific situation.
Yeah, well, that's unfortunate. I think that's on whoever that salesperson is. I think that's on them. If that's just not a reasonable person.
It could be also on the SE that they're not explaining the situation properly for the salesperson. Like, hey, I need that time to actually do this for you. Make it about the sales guy, I guess. But
yeah, well, it's like a good marriage, right?
Yeah.
Got to communicate.
Yeah, worst comes to worst, just get some bats. That's not how I treat my wife, just in case anybody's wondering. We don't have bats here. All right. I'm digging myself into a hole. So what advice would you give an SE that you feel they don't get from anybody else?
I'm sorry, you broke up there. Say that again.
What advice would you give a sales engineer that you feel they don't get from anybody else?
Wow, I'm not sure they don't get it from anybody else.
All right, fine. What's the advice that you would give?
Well, it's the number one thing, and I've pointed to it a number of times already, and that's listen more than you talk.
Yeah, I think they get that from everybody else, but they need to get it from almost everybody so that they actually apply it.
Well, they do. They do, right? And I mean, we all have worked with salespeople and SEs who are not good listeners. Especially salespeople. I've worked with a lot of salespeople. I mean, most salespeople, if you think about the personality that describes the salesperson, they're a person who likes to talk. So it's not, in a lot of cases, natural for them to shut up and listen when they need to listen.
I agree.
You know, the other thing that I would offer, and I'm not sure everybody is afforded this opportunity, make as much of your customer contact face-to-face as you can.
Why?
Because I think that once you understand and you're able to read a customer's body language and facial expressions, it can take you in directions that never would have happened over the phone. I've never met and I'll point back to an interview, I've never met anybody who says, wow, I really like doing phone interviews.
I agree.
For exactly that reason.
I agree. I do feel there are some situations that phone or WebEx would be better, which is weird. I never thought about that before, but sometimes we go meet with customers or we're trying to work with them on a problem and they just disappear because we're there doing the work. So I started doing WebExes and now they're forced to be there and work with me, and we're doing things way faster and more efficient. But that's just a certain situation.
Yeah, I think it's a balance. I mean, but even in that case, I would prefer to see them, right? And to see reactions, and you just don't get it on the phone. Now, I understand logistically, it's not always possible. And, you know, we all travel a lot, and we have customers in a lot of different geographies that make traveling difficult, so you have to do what you have to do. But if you have the opportunity, I think face-to-face is always better.
I agree. All right. Well, that brings me to the end of our conversation. Do you mind if I put your LinkedIn in the show notes so people know how to reach out for you? Or
Sure.
Okay, perfect.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Mike, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for spending this hour with me.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. I appreciate the time and the invitation.
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thanks. That's good feedback.
Yep.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, Mike. We'll talk soon then.
Hey, have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
So that was it. That was my conversation with Mike. Thanks, Mike, for spending your time with me. Everybody's been generous, including Mike, to spend an hour or so having these discussions to the benefit of the sales engineering world, because there aren't that many resources out there. So thank you for that. And thank you guys for listening and spending time with me. I know everybody's time is valuable, so you choosing to spend some time with me, that's very humbling. But even though it's humbling, I do have a request, because it always comes, doesn't it? If you're enjoying this content, if you think that this is useful for you, for anybody else, I want to spread the word. Spread the word whichever way you see fit. Like, ideally, I would want iTunes ratings and reviews, but if you guys prefer just sharing it on LinkedIn or just talking about it on Reddit or Quora or wherever, just spread the word, because we have to build this community. We have to work with each other. We have to help each other. So let's get it done. And I do have a question for you guys. Let me know what your thoughts. How would you feel about a webinar? And it's funny because I'm waiting for an answer. How would you feel about a webinar that's like 15 to 20 minutes, where I spend 15 to 20 minutes giving you my thoughts, or at least one of my previous guests on the show, like John Haldy or Bill McCarroll from the first episode, or just name one and I'll try to get him back. we'll do a live webinar, 15 to 20 minutes about a specific topic like discovery calls or preparing for a POC or whatever. And then we spend the other 40 minutes with a Q&A open to discussion. Let me know what you think about that. And the best way to do it is to subscribe to the newsletter, because I will reach out afterwards and we'll have this discussion. I'd love to have a two-way communication with you guys, because you're the people who I'm trying to help, including myself, obviously. But if there's anything you guys want to talk about, that's what I want to talk about. All right, I'm done talking. I got to go. Thank you guys for spending your time, and I'll see you next week. With that, this is Ramsey signing off.